Pigeons are retired spies for the KGB. The world is not flat or a sphere, but exists in the eyes of a flamboyant centaur called Steven. The current world you live in and everything that exists in it has been created by your coma dream. And through social media, your loved ones have been trying to communicate to you from the outside, wishing for you to wake up. Timmy, it's been 18 years. We love you. Please wake up. Which of these statements about our world can be answered with absolute certainty? Well, the answer to that is a thick maybe. Everything is uncertain.
The two of you made us uncertain.
Yet, to the absurdist, better known as the cool existentialist, they cannot accept uncertainty. They can reject everything except this thirst for unity, this longing to solve, and this need for clarity and cohesion. What I know, what is certain, what I cannot deny, what I cannot reject, this is what counts. A minute in and you're making people read already? It's like you want people to click off. An absurdist demands unity and certainty from the universe. Yet, the universe responds with absolute indifferent silence. Bitch. This conflict of uncertainty between us fleshy bags and the universe is called the absurd. Your mother may or may not be sleeping with that kid online. Your partner can or cannot be a chum salmon, and your dog might as well be an alcoholic. To all these uncertainties, there is one certainty that we can experience as long as we exist. This certainty being the absurd. The one conflict that always remains and is 100% certain.
Will you fight?
Yet how do we accept the absurd? Do we strategically ghost it on Snapchat to get it interested in us? Take it on fancy dates to Applebee's?
Hi, welcome to
Use organic condoms? Well, apparently it's a little bit more complicated than that. Of course it is. You see, the method of accepting the absurd is not embracing it. Camus says, let us insist again on the method. It is a matter of persisting. We do not embrace, but persist and fight in keeping the conflict alive, keeping the truth of the absurd constantly in view. In doing so, Camus states fighting the absurd requires committing to 3 consequences, the first of which being knowing whether or not man is free doesn't interest me. I can experience only my own freedom. Now, the name of this consequence is ironic, because Camus whips his dick out saying it's impossible to know if we're inherently free. Free will is like the meaning of life. It is uncertain and unknowable. This free will transcends us. So let us pay attention to the earthly/human version of freedom. The everyday man lives with aims, a concern for the future or justification. He counts on someday. He still thinks that something in his life can be directed. He acts as if he were free. The everyday person acts like they have free will, free to choose which path they want into the future, also called metaphysical liberty. However, the future is uncertain because of death, and really, the future doesn't exist. And Camus points out how unfree it is to choose a path to become something. Filling a future role is ultimately restricting and not freeing at all.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
Well, since the metaphysical liberty of the future is unattainable, we replace it with freedom of the now. That perversion of hope and future means an increase in the man's availability. With the destruction of future liberty, we can begin to live within the current moment, having absolute freedom to do what we please in the passing seconds we have, only if we ignore freedom of the future and put that effort into action of the now. If the absurd cancels all my chances of internal freedom, it restores and magnifies, on the other hand, my freedom of action, caused by living with passion, the second consequence. If I admit that my freedom has no meaning except in relation to its limited fate, then I must say that what counts is not the best living, but the most living. Here, Camus is being like Jordan Peterson, but instead of waking up and making your bed every day, his self-help tip is living with quantity, not quality. Knowing whether you live life with quality is unknowable, because it is subjective and means nothing when you're dead. However, we can try to feel and experience everything that this world has to offer, like what it feels like to level a city, or swallow a bucket full of lava, or do some goat yoga. Maybe just the last one. We must live with a catalog of many experiences, and not a limited one based on subjective quality. This passion for life in quantity also means passion for the present. The present and the succession of presents before a constantly conscious soul is the ideal of the absurd man. For living with passion in the present moment keeps the absurd alive. The absurd exists in the present conflict. The absurd person doesn't look to the future or past, but lives with the passionate flames of revolt, thus marking the last consequence of persisting with the absurd.
Check this out.
Revolt. Before the absurd, the only answer we had in this meaningless universe was the awful idea of suicide.
Down there, Bill. Satellite dish trouble?
No, I'm just up here to kill myself.
However, with this idea of revolt in mind, the truly serious philosophical problem of suicide that Camus questioned is answered. We have something to revolt against, the absurd, thus making this destructive choice obsolete.
Not today, old friend.
It was previously a question of finding out whether or not life had to have a meaning to be lived. It now becomes clear, on the contrary, that it will be lived all the better if it has no meaning. We do not need meaning to live. The tension between us and the absurd gives us something to live for without meaning. Thus, the awful actions of physical suicide and philosophical suicide are devoid of any proper action, even though they never have. Want to know more about philosophical suicide and the absurdity with suicide? Well, check out a Wanderer's other videos to learn about them. And there's your shameless plug of the day. We can live a great life with fiery, passionate hearts in the freedom of present action to revolt against the tension of the absurd. It is a constant confrontation between man and his only absurdity. It is an instance upon an impossible transparency. It challenges the world anew each second. To rebel is to give our own lives meaning, to do whatever we want in the present moment in spite of this battle between our consciousness and the cosmos. However, the absurd can never be settled with, for it cannot be killed, and we must not ignore the absurd with hope. Trash! Because we won't win. It is a hopeless revolt, and a crushing one. Yet that is the consequence of existing, that we must rebel knowing we will lose. We must live to the bitter end and sap life of its passion and pleasures to lose as joyfully as possible. We must be like Sisyphus, watching his boulder roll down the hill, to only carry it back up with a wide grin. For he and all of us must live in that consciousness and in that day-to-day revolt. He gives proof of his only truth, which is defiance. Camus' question of suicide is answered by these three consequences of fighting the absurd, them being revolt, freedom, and passion. By the mere activity of consciousness, I transform into a rule of life what was an invitation to death, and I refuse suicide. Thus, Camus creates a roadmap for the absurd man, woman, or person to follow. One which installs our hearts with a flame so bright that it drives us to action in the present to fight the very universe that will kill us. We, the wanderers who persist against the absurd, exist to fight the indifferent world with our own undying passion for life.
I could do this all day.
We, amazing sentient beings, may drift in the void of human existence and the cosmos. Yet one constant truth remains in our existence, the absurd, and with our own knowledge of the consequences, what is our response? I rebel.
Here comes the crescendo.
Therefore, I exist.